It's 1950, the year after NATO was formed. The start of the Cold War. And on January 26th, a Douglas C-54 military transport plane with 44 people on board took off from Alaska's Elmendorf Air Base in the middle of the Alaska Triangle. Two hours into the flight, it disappeared.
How, in 1950, could a plane this size, with 44 people on board, vanish in the Alaska Triangle?
It remains a mystery to this day.
One man is on a quest to find out what happened to the Douglas. Veteran U.S. Air Force pilot Dan Hampton has flown over 150 combat missions, including in Iraq and the Gulf War. And as a veteran of numerous search and rescue missions, the idea that a plane could go missing and never be found goes against all his training and experience. He's now determined to find answers to the airplane's disappearance.
This was a C-54 standard military transport, carried people, cargo, equipment, things like that.
With a wingspan of over 100 feet, the Douglas C-54 was one of the most important planes in the U.S. Air Force.
This particular C-54 was carrying 36 passengers, some military dependents, and 8 crew members. The plane took off from Elmendorf Air Force Base, headed east 240 miles to its first mandatory reporting point, right on the border of the Yukon Territory and Alaska, a little town called Snag. It made its radio call over Snag on time using a VHF radio, and then it vanished without a trace. This happened on the fringe of what's become known as the Alaska Triangle. That's where this airplane was when it vanished.
The Douglas was on a well-worn flight path. But these were volatile times. The two great superpowers, the US and Russia, then the Soviet Union, were in a nuclear arms race, and each would do anything to get the upper hand.
Remember, this is 1950. The Cold War has begun in earnest. Russia is in this mad scramble to face off against us ideologically all over the world.
Alaska is only 56 miles from the Soviet Union. And the Soviets knew that US nuclear bombers could be over their territory within minutes. The world was on the brink, and all eyes were on Alaska. Historian Sasha Auerbach has been looking into recently released government files from the Cold War.
Nuclear weapons were the most powerful thing that the US had. They always had more of them than Russia did, and they wanted them within reach of the Soviet Union. So Alaska was the natural launching point for the bombers. They want every strategic advantage, and Alaska is absolutely the key to that.
Elmendorf was built in Anchorage to protect the northern edge of the United States. It's equipped with all the latest technology, radars, strategic bombers, and fighters, specifically to combat the threat from the Soviet Union.
We're talking about one of the most surveilled airspaces in the world at the time. This was supposed to be where America was most prepared for an invasion, where it was most concerned about Russian planes coming over. So the fact that they lost a plane with all these radio assets watching this whole area must have been really galling. What's also interesting is that this happened the same year that the US was about to have its first operational hydrogen bomb. So I'm sure the tension was super high.
The US military were immediately concerned that the Soviets might have downed the Douglas. But when it disappeared, the Douglas was flying directly away from the Soviet Union. It would have been impossible for any Soviet fighter planes to get this far east without being spotted.
The Alaskan airspace is not an ordinary airspace. It is monitored very closely, very carefully all the time. Why? Because it's sitting right next to the adversary of the United States, Russia. So every motion, every object that's moving in and out of that area is being tracked.
After Snag, there was no further contact with the C-54. Nobody thought anything of it, but about an hour after it was supposed to land in Great Falls, Montana, way down in the south, didn't show up. It was declared missing, and an enormous search effort sprang into action.
At the time of the disappearance, the U.S. and Canadian armed forces were about to start a big war games operation. But now, the missing plane took top priority.
They canceled the war games and put all those resources and people into this search effort.
Confidence was high. The U.S. military in Alaska were experts in search and rescue.
The Rescue Coordination Center at Elmendorf keeps busy the year round, including Air Force and Army search and rescue efforts in Alaska's vast inland region.
7,000 ground troops and 85 aircraft were deployed to help in the search.
What this is comes out of the original Air Force accident reports. This shows the extensive, enormous search area that these 85 planes undertook to try to find this C-54.
They end up searching about 300,000 square miles of territory, which is massive. It's a space the size of Venezuela.
The scale of this is unprecedented. So it makes you wonder, was there really something special or unique about this flight that it had to be found? Was it because there's somebody on board that made it necessary to find it?
A list of the passengers and crew reveals no one out of the ordinary. It was a routine flight. Perhaps there was something on board, a secret piece of tech, top secret information. Evidence of some kind that the authorities wanted to remain hidden.
Or was it necessary to find it because of where it went down?
Disappearing right on the edge of the triangle. Was it a sign of some unknown force at work? Something more dangerous, perhaps, than any human adversary. 1,000 miles down the coast from Elmendorf in Vancouver, Canada, journalist Johnny Enoch has uncovered an unlikely series of events.
During the search and rescue effort, there were over 85 planes looking for the C-54. That's when strange and unexplained things started to happen, leading investigators to believe that something wasn't right. There was something mysterious and bizarre going on.
An airplane was participating in this search and rescue, crashed down here near the southern end of the triangle. In this particular case, they stalled, they crashed, nobody died, and the pilot walked about 13 miles to the Alaska highway and everybody got rescued. On the 7th of February, another aircraft goes down. This time it's a C-47 in the southern part of the search grid. No fatalities, but again, what caused it to go down? There's always an investigation when a military aircraft has an accident, especially a crash. And in this case, they never disclosed what exactly happened. But the fact the military never said anything about it is suspicious.
Just over a week later, a third search plane went down, very near to the last recorded position of the missing Douglas. But the fourth plane to crash was the most significant, and this wasn't one of the search planes. It was twice as big as a Douglas, with a cost of over $4 million. That's over $40 million in today's money.
On February 14th, the last in this bizarre string of occurrences happens. A B-36, which is a nuclear bomber, takes off from Eielson Air Force Base north of Elmendorf, and it's heading for Fort Worth, Texas, nonstop.
The nuclear bomber was on an exercise, simulating a strike against the Soviets.
Keep in mind that we're talking about a period before the invention of the intercontinental ballistic missile. If you're going to deliver nuclear weapons on target, the only way to do it is via a long-range bomber. And most of the Soviet Union and the targets they want to reach are quite far away, so they have to test these things.
The B-36 flew out west over the Pacific before turning back into the triangle, with the coast in sight as it was returning towards Juneau. The plane lost all power. The Mark IV atomic bomb was jettisoned into the ocean. The airplane then crashed into Mount Kodiak in British Columbia.
The plane goes down and is lost, along with the nuclear weapon and several thousand pounds of conventional explosives as well.
The bomb was never found. It was the first loss of a nuclear bomb in history.
The American military planners, of course, worried about the loss of such aircraft. I mean, these are very, very valuable assets. There's always the fear that anything lost is something that the Soviets are going to recover, and they're going to make every effort to keep it out of the public news. And a lot of the information we have about these disasters really only became available when the records were declassified, so it remained a mystery for quite some time.
4 airplanes lost within a 30-day period, including a frontline nuclear bomber. What is going on inside the Alaska Triangle?
Hostile Soviet activity is ruled out. The military had to start considering other possibilities.
The first thing that leaps to mind is some sort of electromagnetic interference with the magnetic navigation instruments on board. That's all they had.
Alaska is not just remote, it's northerly. That part of the world, there's all kinds of strange magnetic forces at play that you don't see anywhere else.
I think the presence of strange electromagnetic and gravitational anomalies could be the reason for many of the instrument failures and plane crashes plaguing the Alaska skies.
This is up near the pole. I've flown up there. I've had my magnetic-based backup instruments go crazy. Thank goodness I didn't have to rely on them like these guys did. That's all they had. And if you encounter a variation in the electromagnetic field, it's going to cause your compass to do this. And if you're trying to navigate and steer from it, you can see the problem. You don't really know where you're going.
So the long history of air crashes in the Alaska Triangle could be down to unusual and extreme electromagnetic forces. The Douglas could have got lost, run out of fuel, and crashed. But if this happened, then surely the plane would have been found. So the fundamental question remains, where is the Douglas? Could there be a more sinister explanation for its disappearance? Some who have been researching the case have come up with a disturbing theory.
I do think the Douglas incident could have been intervention by a UFO.
Jesse Desmond is the Alaskan State Director for MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network.
Alaska is a great place for UFOs because we have this vast amount of space and very few people, which means that they can do stuff without a whole lot of onlookers.
In 2003, there was a reported sighting of a whole mass of UFOs in a deserted area just 200 miles south of Fairbanks. Now, Jesse has found a close link between UFOs and the military.
Alaska UFOs really kind of started with World War II because we had a couple of sightings over the Bering Sea. These were recorded by crewmen on military boats. We had all these radar sites, and the military used those to detect UFOs over Alaska airspace. And then we had waves of UFO sightings all over the state.
One of the most famous was in 1986, when the crew of a Japanese airline flight witnessed 2 UFOs trail their plane right in the middle of the Alaska Triangle. Is there a link with the missing Douglas? A top-secret intelligence report from February 10, 1950, reveals that UFOs were stalking U.S. naval planes just days before the Douglas vanished. The first of these encounters was above the Naval Air Station of Kodiak, only 250 miles southwest of the Douglas's departure point in Anchorage. MUFON investigator Jeremy Ray has been analyzing the reports.
Shortly before the disappearance of the Douglas aircraft, there was a Navy pilot that witnessed a UFO. This UFO was clocked on radar going 1,800 miles per hour, and during that time, we didn't have anything that could go that fast, so I find it very interesting.
The plane's radar operator reported the strangest interference he had ever seen. The control tower was in a state of panic. There should have been no other aircraft in the area. Suddenly, the UFO vanished, only to reappear 2 hours later trailing the Navy plane. It followed the aircraft for some minutes before vanishing once more. The Navy chiefs issued a top-secret report to the highest levels of the U.S. government. Journalist and researcher Andrew Goff has been on the trail of this report.
The 1950s report was so important that 36 copies of the Navy's detailed analysis was sent to various security agencies such as the FBI, the CIA, the Air Force Intelligence, and even the Department of State.
This document about the Kodiak UFO encounter never saw the light of day until the 1970s, when a Freedom of Information request forced the U.S. authorities to release a redacted version.
This strikes me as yet another government cover-up. They know what's going on, and they are not going to let the public know because they are afraid that they won't be able to handle it.
The Kodiak encounter happened just 4 days before the Douglas disappeared. 2 days after the disappearance came another sighting, and this one takes us right back to Elmendorf.
There was a report of a UFO above Elmendorf Air Force Base. And what's really interesting about this is that that's the same Air Force Base that the Douglas aircraft flew out of.
An Elmendorf commander spotted 3 orange objects above the airbase. They hovered at around 25,000 feet. Then, they mysteriously vanished.
Now, a lieutenant colonel, of all people, sees something so bizarre, so unusual, that he has to file an unidentified flying object report. That must have been something really weird.
There are some who do now believe that the Douglas could have been taken by a UFO. Jeremy Ray thinks the answer could lie in the use of a tractor beam, a super strong energy beam which can pull anything else towards it.
It is possible that the Douglas could have been controlled by a UFO, maybe pulled in by a tractor beam. That is kind of possible due to all the reports that we've heard about of pilots reporting UFOs taking control of the aircrafts.
In 1948, in Kentucky, in what is known as the Mantell incident, a young pilot was killed after losing control of his aircraft while pursuing a UFO. In 1958, in Snag, the very area where the Douglas was last recorded, 2 men out on a moose hunt reported a metallic oval UFO hovering above a marsh. The theory goes that the C-54 was overpowered by superior technology, and that's why the plane's never been found. But a few weeks after the Douglas disappeared in Alaska, there were strange signs that the plane might still be out there.
On the 2nd of February, faint radio signals were heard.
This is what had the search teams continuing to hold out hope that they were going to find the C-54. So for example, here's a story from February 1st out of Whitehorse, Yukon Territory, which is right around the first of the main search areas, that you had faint radio signals on the distress band, which raised hopes that this C-54 was going to turn up. And there were 44 people on board, so they really wanted to find this plane.
People could hear chatter of people talking, but not able to make out what they were saying. And it wasn't just in one location, it was scattered around the area.
You can't pinpoint where they're coming from. Can you imagine hearing these voices? You're struggling to make out what they're saying, but it's too distorted, it's too distant. It's kind of human sounding, you recognize that, but there's something just wrong about it. Imagine how eerie that must have been for the people who were picking this up.
The radio messages continued to taunt the search teams for days after the Douglas's disappearance. But gradually, they became more distant. Faraway voices, magnetic anomalies. This evidence has led some experts to come up with a startling idea.
One of the theories about what happened to the Douglas is that it flew into a portal, which is a gateway to another dimension where time and space are different from ours. If you think for a moment that this plane could have flown into a vortex, into a portal, that what you're faced with is the possibility that you're hearing sounds coming back from another dimension.
Vortices are created by powerful planetary electromagnetic forces. My theory about what could have happened to the missing Douglas is that a portal could have opened up that was powered by the Alaska Triangle, causing it to travel into another dimension or another universe somewhere out there in the multiverse, causing it to disappear altogether, and I don't think it will ever be found.
Could those distant, garbled voices really have been mayday calls from the crew of the Douglas, trapped in another dimension? The theory goes back to the huge amount of electromagnetism in the air. Mike Ricksecker is a paranormal investigator who's been studying the effects of electromagnetism for many years.
I'm really fascinated about how the energy is connected around the globe, because I believe that we all as people are interconnected and we are connected with the universe.
For Mike, vortices are a part of this interconnection.
A vortex is energy from the Earth's core that has risen to the surface, and it can affect electronic equipment, which, if it swells up into the air, it can affect an airplane, throw it off course, cause it to crash, and there's even theories about it being swept up into another dimension.
So maybe a vortex in the triangle could cause planes to crash and even to disappear. But is there any real evidence of a vortex? The best comes not from planes, but ships, and from an area far to the south.
These vortices can affect objects that are even larger, like ships. You hear about these disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle and ships that have gone down there or completely missing.
The Bermuda Triangle is a vortex. One witness says that's exactly what he encountered when making a routine flight across these waters. And his story might hold the key to the missing Douglas. Bruce Gernon has flown the skies over Miami for over 50 years. But he's had one flying experience unlike any other.
I'm the only living person to fly through a vortex. Most people probably can't believe it, and I find it hard to believe myself.
Bruce's story begins on December 4th, 1970, when he was flying on the southern edge of the Bermuda Triangle.
We took off right here from Andros at 3 o'clock, 100 miles east of Miami. And this big horizontal tunnel formed. And when I entered the mouth of it, something amazing happened instantly. These lines formed, and they were rotating counterclockwise, very slowly. I realized I was actually seeing the fabric of space and time.
When Bruce entered the vortex, he was still far to the east of Miami. But in just seconds, he found himself flying above the city.
I was in this dull gray fog, and then went to bright blue, and I could see below me, there it was, the city of Miami Beach, right below me. As soon as we touched down, I checked my time, and the flight had only taken 47 minutes. That doesn't make sense. I had made this flight at least a dozen times previously, and it always took an hour and 20 minutes. I had just witnessed something that was incredible, that I didn't quite understand, but I knew I would never forget about it. When we landed, we would always fill up the airplane and top it off. Here's the actual gas receipt here, and it shows you the exact date, November 4th, 1970. And as you can see, we only took on 29 gallons. And it always would take at least 40 gallons of fuel. And it helps explain that something incredible really did happen.
If there is a vortex in the Bermuda Triangle, it could explain one of its most famous incidents.
The story of Flight 19. This is the classic Bermuda Triangle story.
English journalist Jerry Glover has been looking into the facts behind this famous event.
Flight 19 was a US Air Force squadron, a training squadron. It flew out from Fort Lauderdale in Florida in December 1945 on a bombing practice run. 5 Avenger aeroplanes, 14 men altogether. They flew east, and after several hours, all transmissions from them ceased, and the flight completely disappeared. Just a few hours after this, in the early evening, a boat plane with 13 men was sent up in search of them. That plane too disappeared, with no explanation at all. Something like 300 boats and planes were sent out in search of Flight 19, but no trace of them was ever found. The whole event has been a mystery ever since. What happened to Flight 19 in the Bermuda Triangle may never be explained, but it goes to show that in places like these, planes can completely disappear and without a trace. Even though the Bermuda Triangle is much more well known around the world, it's striking that in recent years we have come to find out more about the existence of a possible Alaska Triangle due to the resemblance between mysterious cases of disappearances that have taken place in that area. These are all reminiscent of famous Bermuda Triangle cases.
From the safety of the ground, Bruce is looking at a simulation of the Douglas's flight through a portal. He's curious to know if it bears any relation to his own experience.
What I'm looking at here is an animated video of what maybe the Douglas experienced in Alaska. And it shows it flying through the tunnel. It looks very realistic. It's starting to reach the very end of the tunnel. It's almost at the end now, but it looks like it may have just disappeared before it reached the end. This could be the same tunnel that I've moved through. It's almost identical. So who knows, maybe the same thing happened to the Douglas that happened to me.
Traveling through space and time is now something that even NASA has been investigating. In 2011, a NASA space probe was launched containing 4 spinning gyroscopes. Over time, the axes drifted, enough to show that time and space are woven together. This went a long way to confirming the science behind space-time vortices.
Could the Douglas craft have flown into a portal? And is a portal part of the inherent mystery in the Alaska Triangle?
If there was a portal in the triangle, it could explain more than just the disappearance of the Douglas. It could explain the mystery of the Alaska Triangle itself. The Arctic atmosphere is home to one of the wonders of our planet, the Aurora Borealis, or the Northern Lights. This incredible light display dances across the sky as the Earth's magnetic field is bombarded by charged particles from the sun. 1,000 miles south of the Arctic Circle lies the city of Vancouver, Canada. More people live in this one city than in the whole of Alaska. And it's from here that journalist and researcher Johnny Enoch has been looking into some important historical work that could have a bearing on the search for unusual forces in Alaska.
In 1972, author and biologist Ivan Sanderson documented 12 places on the planet where there was bizarre weather, strange occurrences, vanishing people, and disturbing paranormal occurrences.
Sanderson called these areas vile vortices, where it's thought that an extreme electromagnetic force, the force that holds atoms together, can have an effect on the very fabric of space and time. The most famous of these vortices, the Bermuda Triangle.
A vortex can transform everyday situations into otherworldly events. If there was a vortex above the Bermuda Triangle, that would explain everything.
A vortex that contorted space and time into a wormhole would mean boats and planes could disappear. If there was any evidence of this in the Bermuda Triangle, then it could explain the Alaska Triangle too. Now, some first-hand evidence of a vortex has come to light down in Miami, Florida.
Vortices definitely exist because I've been through it.
In 1970, pilot Bruce Gernon was flying in the Bermuda Triangle, from the small island of Bimini in the Bahamas to Miami. Shortly after takeoff, he found himself traveling through a strange tunnel in the clouds. When he came out the other end, there was Miami below him. His instruments showed that he'd traveled 100 miles in under 3 minutes.
The tunnel was like a wormhole. When you enter it, you come out in a different place and time. It was almost like being teleported. One night I was watching television and Ivan Sanderson came on. He was explaining time warps, and it was right at that point that I realized that was the key to the mystery that I had just witnessed.
So what would make Alaska prime territory for time warps? One theory points to its abundance of extreme electromagnetic force fields. Mike Ricksecker is a paranormal investigator with a particular interest in electromagnetism.
In 1964, there was a massive earthquake that hit the Anchorage area, 9.2 magnitude, absolutely devastating. Buildings were toppled, streets were upended, created a lot of destruction around this area. We know that electromagnetic activity helped to cause this earthquake.
An increase in electromagnetic readings have been reported before major earthquakes. Scientists are yet to understand the reason. And the '64 quake was the biggest earthquake ever recorded in North America, the second biggest ever in the whole world. The epicenter? Prince William Sound on Alaska's southern coast. In fact, Alaska averages 100 minor quakes every day. That's more earthquakes than all the other states combined.
Alaska in general is a very volatile area. When I first showed up in '92, there was ash still falling from the sky from volcanoes that are in the area.
There's one sure way Mike knows how to detect any unusual electromagnetic activity.
So we're up here in the mountains of Alaska. We have some dowsing rods with us. What I'm going to try to do here is walk around a little bit, see if we start to feel a little bit of something going on, then I'll go ahead and stop and see if the activity keeps going.
If the rods move, it would be the sign of unusual electromagnetic energy. And this knowledge goes back a long way.
Since ancient times, it's been known that our planet is covered with geomagnetic anomalies and vortices. We know the ancient peoples saw the movement of energy on the planet as a serpent, so that's why every one of these ancient cultures is based around a serpent mythology. To understand the Alaska Triangle, you have to understand that there's an energy grid on our planet. Now, these have been traditionally called ley lines, but to the ancient peoples, they called this the serpentine energies.
It's these same energies that Mike is trying to detect in the Alaska Triangle.
So we're getting a little push from the left side there. If we move away and that goes back out, then that'll let us know that the activity, the energy was centralized back there, and we can already see it starting to move out a little bit. Yeah, see, it's moved back out. As we come back, see, it's moving back as we move back into this area. Yeah, so this is a hot spot here. So as we come down the mountainside here, we see that the left rod has moved inward and it's maintaining that. So what I would say is that up and down here, there's some sort of line of electromagnetic activity running up and down the mountainside here. So it's not running across, but up and down.
The line that Mike has found heads due north towards the North Pole, just over 1,000 miles away. The intense electromagnetism of the North Pole feeds into the triangle. If there is a vortex here, it could be many times more powerful than even the Bermuda Triangle and the force behind thousands of disappearances.
Alaska is near the North Pole. The magnetic fields get thinner here. And because of that, when solar storms hit, it lights up the atmosphere because we don't have the magnetic protection of the electromagnetic field.
The native population believes this electromagnetic energy can have dangerous spiritual properties.
The unusual electromagnetic energy makes it so we have supercharged areas that could allow interdimensional travel or portals to be opened from other realms.
If this were true, then these portals could go a long way to explaining the mystery of the Alaska Triangle.
I think a lot of people who go missing, hikers and adventurers or people going out in the country, can accidentally come across these areas and vanish off the face of the earth.
Strange things do happen. Bruce Gernon did have a bizarre experience of some kind. And conditions are more extreme in Alaska.
So there seems to be a definite relationship, but being so close to the North Pole, that maybe the magnetic energy changes this vortex. Instead of being horizontal, perhaps it is vertical. So the one I flew through, when I came out the other end, I went forward in space and time. But in Alaska, if you enter into it, maybe you go right down into the earth and vanish.
We don't have the tools yet to find these possible portals. For now, researchers need to rely on cruder devices to understand the forces at work in Alaska. Mike is using an electromagnetic field detector.
We're going to walk in this general direction, kind of the same as we did with the RAWs, and see if we can get any indications off of this meter.
The detector shows Mike the level of milliwatts per square meter, the power of the electricity in the air.
And there's a general electric field, keeps reading at about a 0.1, 0.2 right now, so pretty low level. Here it's a little higher on the electric field. It's between a 0.2 and a 0.3. We're getting some variations here that we shouldn't be getting, which does give us an indication that there's a little bit something more going on here. Could it be an indicator that the Alaska Triangle is having an effect here?
As well as leading to vortices, there are those who believe that this effect has attracted visitors from far away.
There have been a lot of extraterrestrial sightings in Alaska, a lot of reports, a lot of photography, a lot of video footage, and it makes a lot of sense that there would. You have the electromagnetic activity from the vortices that they could be tapping into.
I believe the immense power of the Alaska Triangle is used like a superhighway by extraterrestrials looking to open up portals and connect to other places in the universe.
The Triangle is a hotspot for extraterrestrial activity. Since the early 1950s, top-secret U.S. government documents have revealed UFO sightings across Alaska. In some reports, military planes have even been stalked by UFOs mid-flight. Journalist Andrew Goff has been investigating this phenomenon.
There really are few places on Earth as isolated as Alaska. So one can only infer that if there was extraterrestrial activity, if there were UFOs, why wouldn't they go there?
As reports of unidentified flying objects continued into the 1980s, U.S. Air Force bases across Alaska upgraded their radar systems. America's Cold War enemy, Russia, then called the USSR, was just 56 miles from its doorstep.
The U.S. government understands the strategic importance of the location of Alaska, and as a result, it's beefed up the Air Force bases in that region. This area is a highly surveyed region.
But 1986 would see an invasion of Alaskan airspace that many believe came from neither Russia nor any other enemy on this planet. Japan Airlines Flight 1628 would have a strange encounter with a UFO that would trouble the US government for many years to come. On November 7th, the 747 cargo plane, with no passengers on board, entered the Alaska Triangle, 90 miles north of Fort Yukon, at 5:05 p.m. It was en route from Paris to Tokyo. Veteran U.S. Air Force pilot Dan Hampton has retraced the jet's fateful encounter with an unidentified flying object.
This is the cargo version of Japan Airlines 747. Here in the cockpit would have been the first officer, and here was Captain Kenju Torochi, a 10,000 flight hour veteran of the Air Force, ex-fighter pilot.
Captain Torochi had 20 years' experience as a commercial airline pilot, but as Flight 1628 flew deeper into the Triangle, he would witness something never before seen.
At 5:11 p.m., the captain looks off to the left, and about 2,000 feet below him are what he thinks are military aircraft, because who else would be up here with him at 35,000 feet?
So Captain Torochi radioed Anchorage Air Traffic Control at 5:19 p.m. What follows is the actual recording of communication from the cockpit. Soon, air traffic control picked up a high-speed object, tracking the 747.
I'm picking up the hit on the radar, approximately 5 miles in trail, your 6 o'clock position.
Jim Derry was an investigator for the Federal Aviation Authority at the time.
At first, they weren't too frightened when they saw the lights. They thought it was another aircraft, but our air traffic control people contacted the military.
A controller radioed the regional command center at the nearby U.S. Air Force Base Elmendorf to see if the mysterious aircraft belonged to them.
We do not have anybody up there right now.
The military had nothing in that sector.
Unable to identify these unknown aircraft, the air traffic controllers were troubled. Could this be an incursion from Cold War foe Russia, or something more sinister?
Our big concern was when you have something at 35,000 feet that's not under air traffic control, it is a major safety hazard.
But what happened next suggested these certainly weren't Soviet, and they were no ordinary planes. They were about to perform a gravity-defying maneuver.
Something impossible happens. These two things instantly jumped from 2,000 feet below to shooting forward to a position in front of the aircraft. Jets can move quite quickly, of course, but there's nothing that can do that.
The objects exhibited, according to Captain Tarucci, a complete disregard to the limits of gravity. It would start, it would stop, it would accelerate. Can you imagine what that must have been like? You've never seen anything like that in your life.
UFO investigator James Fox believes these were extraterrestrial.
UFOs have the ability to appear in one spot and literally blink out and appear in another location. Conventional aircraft don't do that. This was a bona fide UFO encounter that was documented on radar and had visual confirmation.
Now, just 500 feet ahead, the unidentified aircraft started closing in on the 747. Captain Tarucci was terrified of a mid-air collision.
And the captain is saying these lights are unlike anything he's ever seen before. No wings or real fuselage in the conventional sense that we would think of, and he still can't identify what these things are.
The unidentified flying objects continued to close in.
The lights become so bright, they fill up the cockpit, and then the aircraft began to shake. If this is an otherworldly type of flying object, then these could quite possibly be some types of scan. Maybe infrared, heat-based initially, and then ultrasonics could account for the aircraft shaking.
So incredible was this encounter that the captain said he could feel the heat on his face from the craft next to him.
And at that point, of course, he's very, very concerned because what is this thing or things and why are they so close to his aircraft?
Then the UFOs mysteriously disappeared. With the calm of the Alaskan night skies around him, Captain Tarucci and his crew assumed this terrifying UFO encounter was over. Captain Tarucci and his crew said they watched in terror as another huge UFO approached their 747. Its size and scale left the seasoned pilot awestruck.
What came back was the mothership, the size of an aircraft carrier, only walnut-shaped, and could only have been a UFO.
8 to 10 times as big as his aircraft in height and width, and he is astonished.
Anchorage Air Traffic Control alerted the nearby U.S. Air Force Base Elmendorf. Amazingly, they too had picked up the hostile, unidentified aircraft on radar.
Yeah, it's 102. We have confirmed this. It's flight size of 2 around 1550 square.
It was a large aircraft of some kind. In the radar dots that were picked up, it moved very rapidly. And the military people said, we checked out our primary target with another piece of equipment we have here, and it also detected it.
The fact that it's correlated now between not only a civilian control agency on the ground, but the regional operations center at Elmendorf, to me means this is something we have to take very seriously.
Air traffic control were so concerned, they hatched a plan of emergency. In a rare move, they advised the 747 to make a drastic maneuver.
Commander 1628 Heavy, just thermal request you make a 36 degrees, 360 degree turn, and 5 knots your traffic that's finished.
Remember, a 747 is not a fighter jet. It takes about 5 minutes at that altitude and airspeed to turn a 747 360 degrees, and you're talking about trying to get away from unidentified objects that have been bouncing back and forth between the horizon and you. So he really doesn't have any type of evasive or escape maneuver.
With few options left, Flight 1628 descended to 31,000 feet and started its 360-degree turn. The UFOs continued to stalk the airliner. Air traffic control had one last choice: military action.
The air traffic controller says, "Would you like our military to send some fighter jets up to have a look?" And he says, negative, negative. Not just once, but twice. He's very emphatic about this.
The captain refused a fighter jet because he feared it could provoke a hostile response, as it's believed happened in the infamous Mantell incident of 1948. That year, National Guard pilot Thomas Mantell was sent in hot pursuit of a UFO seen at 10,000 feet over a Kentucky airbase.
Thomas Mantell was chasing a UFO when his plane just dismantled and fell violently to the earth and to his death. Conspiracy theorists believe that the evidence points to the nuts and bolts of its plane being undone somehow by the UFO technology alongside it, and that's why he plummeted to his death. The captain knew about this incident, so he had the wherewithal to say, "I'm not gonna have that again. I'm better off just dealing with this by myself."
Whatever these things are haven't hurt him yet, and he doesn't want to run the risk of that or provoking them.
It must have been a very, very nerve-wracking situation.
When Captain Tarucci refused military assistance, air traffic control radioed a civilian jet flying just south of Fairbanks. They asked United Airlines Flight 69 to approach the Japanese 747 and investigate.
Yes, traffic following him, sir. It's unknown traffic. When you're closer to him, I want you to see if you see anything with it. We'll look for you.
But the UFO disappeared off the radar as the United Airlines pilot closed in.
He gets close enough, he asks the JAL flight to turn on its lights. The United captain sees the JAL flight, but nothing else. So whatever it was that was following the JAL flight has vanished by that point.
After 42 long minutes, Captain Tarucci's reported UFO encounter was finally over. One of the most significant UFO incidents ever in the Alaska Triangle was now on record and witnessed by air traffic controllers, military radar, and 3 professional crew members. Flight 1628 was requested to land at Anchorage. There, U.S. government agencies were set to swoop in, and all records of this UFO incident were to mysteriously disappear. When Flight 1628 landed in Anchorage, investigators were keen to talk to the crew. Federal Aviation Authority agent Jim Derry was asked to attend.
I got a call from our operations center saying we've had some strange incidents with an aircraft coming in over the poles. So This made us pretty interested. My first thought was that we had a Russian intruder. During that period in the late 80s, while the Cold War was still going on, Russians would come over and would intrude, but the military usually sensed it right away and responded. But the military detected no one out in that area, so we were doubly interested.
At Anchorage Airport, Jim Derry met Captain Terrucci and his crew within hours of their reported UFO encounter.
I found it interesting when I shook hands and I met them. Their palms were very sweaty, pupils were very dilated. They saw something that scared them very, very badly. These people believed what they were saying. They were very sincere, and they were very, very believable.
But when Captain Terrucci described the mothership and sketched it for investigators, they were shocked by what they saw. This is the captain's original drawing of the UFO.
What I've got here on the screen are the drawings by the Japan Airlines captain. And the size of this object blew everybody's mind. He's putting his aircraft here in proportion to the size of the overall object, which, as he said, it looked like a flying aircraft carrier. This is like comparing a 747 to a 6,000 passenger cruise ship in size, massive. There's nothing that size that flies that we know of. The other investigator and I rolled our eyes at the time when we saw the sketches because it seemed really way out. But after we saw that it showed up on radar, we weren't quite as skeptical about it.
This is the original radar data. These lines show the flight path of JAL 1628. Then, the UFO appears on screen. It comes and goes as it tracks the 747 at over 500 miles per hour before it mysteriously vanishes altogether. No known aircraft can perform such maneuvers. Soon, this data was sent to the Federal Aviation Authority headquarters in Washington. A senior investigator, John Callahan, would prepare a file about the case for the CIA. But the file would be buried in what some believe was the start of a major government cover-up.
John Callahan was blown away by the amount of data that they actually had. UFO data, not just seconds. Over 30 minutes of data to comb through, radar data, coupled with the voice cockpit recordings. If you listen to the cockpit recordings, you'll hear Captain Terrucci extremely concerned about what he's looking at. He's looking at something 5-6 times bigger than a 747, and he's unable to identify this thing. And you can hear it in his voice. The guy's freaking out. John Callahan did not believe in UFO encounters prior to this incident, and after reviewing the evidence was convinced that UFOs existed.
An urgent meeting was convened with the CIA the next day, where John Callahan presented his disturbing findings.
They reviewed the evidence, they reviewed the cockpit recording tapes, and they were all silenced and told that this matter was classified top secret and not to ever speak about the incident.
John Callahan said that when they briefed it at the national level, there was a person from the intelligence community there who collected all the paperwork afterwards, said this is classified.
The CIA officials said, we're going to confiscate all the radar data that you guys have, and told him, I was never here. This meeting never took place.
But word did get out. Captain Terrucci told his story to reporters and recreated his initial sketches for the world's media, as seen in this photo. Under pressure of the media spotlight, the Federal Aviation Authority went public 4 months after the event.
The FAA held a press conference denying that there was proof of any unidentified flying objects that were captured using radar. They attributed this to an illusion called a split radar image.
The Federal Aviation Authority claimed the blip seen tracking Flight 1628 was no UFO, but a shadow created by the Japanese airliner itself. Former FAA investigator Jim Derry questions this explanation.
The FAA even produced a rather elongated report telling how this kind of shadowing takes place, but any radar specialist that I have talked to before or since denies that that was any kind of a radar shadow.
So how has Flight 1628 become one of the most well-documented cases of a UFO incident in U.S. history? It's thanks to John Callahan, who in 2001 went public with the cockpit recordings and radar data contradicting the FAA's statement.
He had made copies of the cockpit recordings, of the radar confirmation, every bit of investigation that took place with the FAA. John Callahan had kept copies at his desk because they tried to cover this incident up. So if it wasn't for John Callahan, no one would probably know about the details of this incident.
As a result of the publicity, Japan Airlines grounded Captain Taruchi for 2 years. But pilot Dan Hampton believes the evidence revealed later by John Callahan vindicates him.
As a pilot, I am always skeptical of non-pilots, even other pilots that say they've seen something strange. But Captain Taruchi is a professional commercial airline pilot. He's an ex-military aviator with over 10,000 hours of flying time. And he knew very well that by saying anything about this, it would impact his career, and it did. But I have to say, in all honesty, after looking at all the evidence, reading the transcripts, and analyzing it from my standpoint, I believe him.
Flight 1628 also opened Jim Derry's eyes to the many reports of UFOs in the skies above Alaska.
I haven't seen any UFOs, but I have interviewed people, a lot of people who have seen them, to include many pilots. Considering the size of the universe, for us to think that we are the only life form out there is extremely egotistical of us. We don't know what's out there.
Indeed, what else is out there? Are there other mysteries waiting to be discovered? And what might the U.S. government know about them? The JAL incident had a lasting impact on all involved, and no one more so than Captain Taruchi. Now in retirement, he's withdrawn from the public eye. In the Alaska Triangle, it's not just people disappearing. In the skies, planes suddenly vanish, and no one knows why. In fact, planes have been disappearing in the Alaska Triangle since the early days of flight, and mysterious forces have overcome even the most experienced pilots. One of the great aviation pioneers was Wiley Post. Now, journalist and researcher Andrew Goff has been looking into Wiley's early attempt at taking on the forces of the Alaska Triangle.
In 1931, he circumnavigated the globe in 8 days, destroying the previous world record. 2 years later, he becomes the first person to fly solo around the world. This is a guy who experimented with high-altitude flying and discovered the jet stream. I mean, his credentials are totally pristine. So why would he, of all people, have trouble navigating in the Alaska Triangle? Is it because this is where the paranormal comes alive?
In August 1935, Wiley Post was on a flying trip around Alaska with his friend, the equally famous performer and comedian Will Rogers.
They headed off from Fairbanks and headed to Point Barrow on the northern tip of the Alaska Triangle. This 500-mile journey should have been pretty straightforward for an experienced pilot like Wiley Post. But just miles from their destination, they became strangely disorientated and lost their way. Bizarrely, their engine experienced sudden, catastrophic failure. The plane took a nosedive into a lagoon, shearing off its right wing. Both men were dead instantly.
Dan Hampton is a retired lieutenant colonel from the United States Air Force and former combat pilot. He's been looking into the mystery of why air tragedies such as Wiley's are commonplace in the Alaska Triangle.
One thing that leaps immediately to mind is electromagnetic interference. This is up near the pole. Things get screwy up there anyway. I've flown up there. I've had my magnetic-based backup instruments go crazy. If you're trying to navigate off of a magnetic compass, who knows where you're going to end up?
But Wiley Post was experienced enough to cope with a wayward compass. And electromagnetic interference wouldn't account for the sudden engine failure. It does seem that there were other forces at work.
What's behind this? It's one of Alaska's greatest aviation mysteries.
The death of these two men hit the headlines nationwide. But bigger mysteries were to come, including planes more than twice the size of Wiley's completely disappearing. Steve Levi is an author and historian from Anchorage who's been researching the story of how in 1943, a newly built Douglas C-48 with a wingspan of nearly 100 feet simply vanished midair.
When you start talking about missing planes in Alaska, a lot of people think we're talking about bush planes. This particular plane, you can see if something like this goes down, they had to have been able to spot it. If it went down in a lake, if it went down in the forest, there's still a large enough plane that it had to have been found, but it never was.
In June 1943, a C-48 set off on the first leg of its journey from Fairbanks to Whitehorse in the Yukon.
They left about 5:30 in the morning. They're going all the way to Whitehorse. And it's easy to get from here to Whitehorse because there's a roadway there and they were going to be following the road.
The good visibility meant there was no problem following the roads. And the airplane had more than 9 hours of fuel on board. For over an hour, they called in their position reports as required. And then, nothing. The plane simply vanished, never to be seen again. There wasn't even a distress call.
What's really curious is that other aircraft were flying the same route as the C-48 on the very same day. They reported nothing unusual.
They searched for 4 weeks. We're talking about 500 man-hours looking for the plane, and the plane had to have gone down near the roadway.
No wreckage or debris from the C-48 was ever found, which is very unusual. You'd expect from an aircraft that size there to be some tiny trace of it somewhere, but there was nothing. It's a complete mystery. We have no clue at all what happened to it.
In 1950, another Douglas plane, this time even bigger and with 44 people on board, disappeared without a trace in a similar part of the Alaska Triangle. As with the C-48, it had the military completely baffled. It's as if these planes had been taken by some mysterious force.
What if there was something otherworldly involved? Some sort of evil force from within the Alaska Triangle?
It's a shocking theory. And some now believe that the explanation could lie not in our skies, but somewhere far beyond. One disturbing theory is that these planes are being taken by UFOs. The Alaska Triangle is a hotbed of UFO activity, and there's good evidence that these UFOs do have an interest in airplanes. In 1950, a U.S. Navy pilot reported encountering a UFO in the skies over Kodiak. It was tracked on radar, and the Navy chiefs issued a top-secret report to the highest levels of government. A few months later, a lieutenant colonel in the United States Air Force filed a report of 3 UFOs hovering over Elmendorf Air Base in Anchorage. Then, in 1986, in the middle of the Alaska Triangle, the crew of a Japanese Airlines flight watched in horror as 2 UFOs taunted their plane before a huge mothership came into view. If UFOs are abducting whole planes, perhaps to investigate new human technology, then that would explain many of the unsolved cases of missing planes in Alaska. But the most famous instance of a disappearing aircraft in the Alaska Triangle involved an unremarkable bush plane. In 1972, a Cessna carrying leading politician Hale Boggs seemed to vanish into thin air.
Hale Boggs was the House Majority Leader and a member of the infamous Warren Commission that looked into the assassination of JFK in November 1963.
Boggs set out on a journey across southern Alaska with Congressman Nick Begich on October 16, 1972, flown by a very experienced pilot.
They took off from Anchorage and they were on their way to Juneau, and they never arrived. The weather was good. There was no reason that they should have gone down. The plane just simply disappeared. And we're talking about just poof and gone.
The United States Coast Guard, the Alaska State Troopers, and even the Air National Guard all took part in the search, but they found nothing. Despite it being a well-traveled air route and over an area of land that had a lot of ground activity.
There was no wreckage found. There was no record of them landing. There was no crash site, nothing. They were just gone. They just disappeared.
Indeed, no wreckage has ever been found all these years later, rendering the whole case strangely mysterious and very sinister.
How can it be that these planes just disappear? Maybe it's related to paranormal phenomenon that we don't yet understand. Maybe it's related to the UFO activity. It doesn't make any sense at all.
Andrew Goff thinks the answer may have less to do with UFOs and more to do with other dimensions.
It's long been suspected that there are portals or wormholes in the Alaska Triangle that draw unsuspecting aircraft into their path. Could this be the answer as to why, in so many instances, no wreckage has ever been found? Is it because the planes have been taken into another dimension and remain there, trapped?